Hey everybody, and welcome to another Cyabra live session. Delighted to welcome you today. For everyone that's joining and that everyone's about to join. Oh, the number of participants are shooting up, so people are coming into the door. You are welcome to come in and make yourself comfortable. I'm Rafi Mendelsohn of Cyabra. And we're very excited to host you and have you here today. So we're just going to wait for the attendees to go up. We can see people joining right now. I think in the meantime, just a couple of things to point out is firstly, there is a Q&A button. So you are welcome to leave your questions because we've left time at the end of the session to go through as many of your questions as we possibly can. So feel free to add your questions. But in the meantime, one thing I always like to do, and I'm always amazed at, is if you could just let us know where in the world you're joining us from today. It's always fun to see people. So if you can leave it in the Q&A as well, just let us know where you're dialing in from today, where in the world, because it's great to have you with us. So yeah, feel free to add. Oh wow, straight in.
Vegas.
Yes, I'm not sure is anyone gonna be able to top that? Vegas, Dublin, Chicagoland. I presume that's fairly near Chicago. um, Fantastic. Yeah. So carry on telling us where you're dialing in from. But great to have you. Wow, really all around the world. That's fantastic. Um, so yeah, really wonderful. We are going to get to questions at the end. So as you know, as the talk continues, as the session continues, feel free to add your questions, and we will try to get through as many of them as possible. But in the meantime, it's really just a delight, a real honor to welcome everyone here today for a live session, a Cyber live session that I've been looking forward to getting in the diary and getting out there. And so I'm really excited about this. And the topic as well couldn't be more timely because there's so much more outrage whenever we go online. There seems to be more outrage and anger than ever before. And it's trending faster than other stories or trending faster than the facts. And brands are increasingly finding themselves on the wrong end of that outrage. But crucially, I think more and more brands and more people in a communications responsibility are finding out that those attacks are actually they're not by chance, they're by design. Many of them, often, probably most of them. And so that's one of the things that we're going to be unpacking today, that kind of digital threat and how it's evolving, and that topic, as Philippe is going to explain it, as rage farming, which is the coordinated manipulation of that public sentiment in order to provoke a reaction from audiences, to hijack brand narratives, to incite backlash for whatever the motivation is. And what used to be somewhat more organic is now orchestrated, can be powered by bots and bad actors, and certainly magnified by algorithms. And so, for those of you who are new to Cyabra, we help organizations uncover the good, bad, and fake online, and we use AI to detect disinformation campaigns and protect reputations, and hopefully do that also before any damage is done. And so today, I'm really delighted to be joined by a real expert in this field. Philippe is someone that I have. Philippe Borremans is someone who I've been a subscriber to his newsletter and a regular reader of his writings for. I checked the other day; it's about 14 months now, and there are so many great newsletters out there. I unfortunately don't have enough time to get through all of them, so I have to be quite selective about the ones I do. But Philippe is one of my go-to, and it's because he sits at this kind of cross section of crisis communications and AI and communications generally and technology, and has so much experience as the author of guides and guides for like these, but many other as well, and is also the writer behind the Wag the Dog websites, behind the newsletter, behind the podcast, in as many different forms as you want it. But he's also uniquely one of those crisis communications people who it doesn't just help organizations through their crisis situation, but is also, if there's a crisis somewhere in the world, he has his bag packed by the door, ready to go, ready to get on a plane to manage the communications around physical crises around the world, and has lots of experience with his work, including organizations like the World Health Organization. So it's great that he's able to do this. And one recently, when he published his his guide on combating rage farming, I thought we have to have a topic about that. So I'm going to hand you over to Philippe in just a moment. Just another reminder for those of you that have joined just in the last few minutes. It's great to have you with us. But don't forget, you can add your questions. And at the end of the session, we're going to leave some time to try and get through as many questions as possible. And of course, carry on letting us know where you're dialing in from. So without further ado, let's dive in straight into it. Philippe, I will hand over to you. Great to have you with us. How are you doing?
Good. Thanks for having me. The sun is shining. It's a bit windy here in Portugal, but everything is fine. As you said, yeah, the backpack is ready. It's right here next to me. But I hope that for the next couple of weeks, I will not have to travel to one or the other emergency. But it's so that allows me to do these important things as well. And so thanks again for having me on these series of webinars. Really important topic. So. What I wanted to do is take you through a couple of basic principles on what this rage farming and why does it happen and how does it work and how can you, most importantly, how can you defend yourself against them. I just did a bit of research on different examples of different industries, so I made a nice list. For those who are interested, at the end of the webinar there's a list we can send you as well. I like to do that, like extrapolate, like if I would be in healthcare, if I would be in one or the other industry, what could happen in the context of rage farming. So it's always interesting to get these ideas in the air and then see how you can prepare. So I'll take you through a couple of slides, nothing much. It's just to give you a good basis so we can have at least minimum 20 minutes, half an hour of Q&As, because that's where the interesting things are happening. So again, if I go too fast, let me know, Rafi or Michelle. If anything wouldn't move or sound would falter, let me know. So what is rage farming? It's part of disinformation. It's close to misinformation. And it has streets of malinformation. So we have these three big topics, and rage farming is in fact one technique, tactic in that family of let's say disinformation, to call it as it is, because there is an agenda behind that. And that makes it different from true outrage, which still happens online and for good reasons sometimes. But this is deliberate manipulation. So this is really with an agenda. It's sophisticated. It's monetized. People earn money with it. And it's based on false narratives. It's not based on false facts. It's based on false narratives. We'll go into those details later on. It's from a technological point of view, it is exploiting the algorithms that different social media channels have. So it is really looking at rewarding engagement, regardless of where it comes from. Is it positive or negative? It is very much playing the algorithms that are in place. So from a technological point of view, it's generally done by people who actually know these platforms in and out and know how to trigger the algorithm. It's very strange. What I like about rage farming from a professional point of view is that it's a technique and a tactic which is completely geared and triggers our emotions. So it's geared at us human beings, our emotions, our feelings, our biases. So it's also generally organized by people who actually know very well how you can trigger someone, which buttons you need to push. And that's how it then organizes rage into a campaign, which then, of course, triggers sometimes a counter reaction of an organization or not. And again, I saw that was one of the questions. When do you need to react or when not? We'll talk about that as well. But so important points, what is it? It's deliberate, it's an agenda, it's manipulation with a big M. It works through the algorithms which are in place of social media channels, and it completely understands human emotions, biases, and triggers. Now, there are many cases out there. Two big ones: United Airlines and Bud Light. If you look at what is behind the United Airlines attack, that was taking a diversity initiative of the organization, which is fact, which is a corporate announcement, which is a corporate decision, and then taking that fact, which is real, turning it into an a worry and a uncertainty, which again are things that if we're not 100% certain if it's about airlines and airplanes, then we panic a bit. That so they made the link between diversity initiative that it would have an impact on safety standards, which is of course totally untrue because there are regulations in place. But of course, it speaks to, for some people, fear of flying. It speaks to these images that we have of planes crashing. It works on those biases. Worked very well, unfortunately, for United Airlines. And then Bud Light was more on the woke narrative, woke culture, like some call them. They were partnering with an influencer, Dylan Mulvaney, and that was then organized by an organization with very conservative views of the world, who then played on these conservative values. Now, you see what's happening here. Having conservative values is not the issue. I mean, people think what they like. That is not the issue. It's working on an announcement, which is true. Again, Bud Light chose an influencer. That's a fine decision. It's fact. Nothing wrong with that. But taking that, turning it into a round, looking at what is trending, woke is a big topic. Okay, let's link that, and then let's undermine or make it look like it undermines conservative values. So from something that is totally not wrong, just factual, going into an agenda, looking at how some people, their values, how you can trigger fear that their values would be undermined, and then making a campaign of that. Now, if you just do a Google search, there's many of those cases. I just highlight these two. There's others, but these show very well how a fact, a corporate decision, one marketing, one corporate culture, can turn into an issue once it's manufactured into rage farming. Now, how does it work? You have generally a trigger event, a legitimate corporate announcement, an initiative, a policy change. I mean, there are many different things that could trigger it or that could form the basis to then organize this. Then you have the narrative distortion. So bad actors, because again, this is organized, there's an agenda behind it, people earn money with this. Bad actors create a distorted narrative. So they take a real announcement and a real story, but distort it and then look at how can we change that narrative. Can we change facts? Can we remove crucial context? You know, that if you put something out of context, it can be used, and then it's amplified. So this false narrative is then amplified across the different social media channels, really looking at the algorithms, but also using coordinated accounts, fake accounts, bots, etc., etc., all these techniques that we know exist. What then happens is that average Joe and Jane see these messages popping up on their feed, and of course trigger an emotion. And the objective here is to trigger a negative emotion. Rage is an extreme, but we call it rage farming. But we don't suddenly feel comfortable with this. We feel the need to react because it really comes close to what we believe in. Could be our religion, could be our cultural background, our values, all these things that are very important to us. And then a crisis erupts because average Jane and Joe will start to amplify as well this message, and sometimes very actively. And that then makes it for a crisis, or at least an issue, depending on if you go what your triggers are to go from issue to crisis. And then we have that manufactured outrage, which can become a full-blown crisis affecting reputation operators. It can even affect deployment in emergencies, which I've seen. So it can be very, very impactful. Now, when we take a step back, this is what we call cultural framing. So we have larger conflicts, and I'm not talking about armed conflicts, that could be as well, but cultural conflicts, political conflicts, polarization of society, all these things. We need that, or they need that, to actually work around rage farming. They also need to know very much how that links to potential emotional resonance. So how does I don't know, how does American tariffs make you feel? You know, how does the LGBT movement make you feel? How does so all these topics that we know can be topics of conflict, or at least conversation, heated conversations. Then these actors start to play on that. So look at the false narratives and what is actually emotionally resonant for the audiences they want to influence and catch in that whole campaign organization. And then there's also resistance to facts. We know that it is very difficult today for many people to make a distinction: what is fact, what is fiction, what is organized, what is misinformation, disinformation, malinformation. So we know the problems around that, but they are bigger than what we're talking about here. But these bad actors know that exactly, and that's why they're playing on that. So cultural framing make these narratives harder to counter with simple fact checking. They make it very difficult for people to actually go and look at what is actually happening, because again, the main trigger here is often emotional, very much linked to our own biases. Now, if we look at, if you're on the other side, or an organization, whatever kind of organization, what do you need to look at? And these are a couple of early warning signs. By definition, there are coordinating patterns. It is not one single account. It is not two, three. There is a coordination between different accounts sharing similar related messages in a very short time frame. And what you'll see is that it's not exactly the same, but there are catchphrases in there, trigger phrases, and talking points. It's very well organized. So it could look visually different from different accounts, but if you see the storyline and the framing is exactly the same. There's also an unusual engagement. So there's sudden spikes in comments and shares, and that is driven by, of course, the algorithm, but also by emotional reactions. Most of the time, it's the first reaction that people give. Oh, this is whatever they want to say. But it's very emotional reactions rather than factual discussions. We can have a discussion about very difficult topics, but we can have a civilized discussion if we want to. But it is, again, triggered around very emotional reactions. And then what you also see is that the criticism that comes out against whatever you've just announced or are doing, or the position that you take, is that it lacks nuance. So there's no nuance. It's very straightforward. It removes that context to try to understand things. And it's really provocative, emotional. So it is there to provoke emotional response, but the images and the posts are very provocative, and there is no nuance at all. And then the unnatural spread, it's not gradual, it's very sudden, and there is this increase in a very short time. Rafi, maybe you want to jump in. Is that what you actually see, because you're on that early warning side of things?
Absolutely. I actually really am. I'm glad you asked because it's exactly what we're seeing. But also it's important to emphasize because the examples you gave are quite well-known ones, and so therefore it makes more sense to give those ones. And there is often in this conversation the temptation to point at the very well-known examples of very large brands who have had very visible crises around well-known topics. But actually, the way that you're unpacking the context and the way this happens and the way it's manufactured is something that we are seeing both with brands of all sizes, and by the way, not just brands, but also when it comes to high profile individuals or executives. But is also things that these are tactics and techniques that we're seeing also on a smaller scale. So it might not end up in a full-blown crisis, but these are certainly the kind of tactics that we are seeing. That's what we're experiencing at Cyabra. That's the conversations that we're having with brands. And so actually, if I have one point to make, is just to emphasize the fact that if this sounds like far-fetched or sci-fi or something for the future or something that's only relevant for only the largest of brands, actually we're seeing this on smaller scales happening all the time on a day-to-day basis. I wish it wasn't the case. Sorry to be the bearer of bad news, but exactly what we're seeing here in terms of the warning signs is things that we're seeing on very small, on smaller contexts as well, in like a smaller situation rather than a full-blown crisis. So yeah, absolutely. It's definitely what we're seeing.
Yeah, no, and it's an important point you make. This can happen to any kind of organization, be it public sector, private sector, and of any kind of size. And as you said, also to individuals, high-profile individuals, CEOs, or other people. So it's not something that is only for those top global brands that everybody knows. It is actually something that can happen and can be organized against any kind of organization, any kind of sector, definitely. Yeah. Now, how do you prepare for this? So I'm working in crisis, risk, and emergency communication. Preparation is where you win or lose a battle. And so how can you prepare that? Well, one of the things or techniques that I often work with clients is building their what is called a truth bank. It's actually really a repository of accurate information about your organization's positions, policies, and practices, because those are the three that rich farmers, the bad actors, will probably work on. It's your position on a certain topic, it's your internal policies, and it's your practices that you do on a regular basis. So it's really looking at how do you document these things and create a repository, so that and a factual one, right? So accurate information that can be traced back, that is public, that is there, but organized, that it's quickly there if and when you need it. It's documented, so it's not only the facts, but it's also explaining why these initiatives and policies, etc., are important to the organization and to your different audiences. And don't forget the internal teams, because rage farming attacks have a huge impact on your internal employees as well. And that is the why of things. Why do we take that position? Why do we feel that we need to take a position? Why do we have that policy in place? Why do we do things like we do them? And you document that. And then you need supporting evidence. So if you, for the communicators who are on this webinar, it is a bit similar to how you would construct a key message. You had your overarching messages, and under that you have your proof points. So it's a bit similar, but you need that supporting evidence. So data, standards broader than you could explain, for instance, we are doing this because this is part of our broader industry, and that's the way that we do things, because it's linked to an ISO whatever, or it's linked to a security procedure whatever. But try to also make that link to, for instance, industry standards if you have them, or compliance information. I mean, the law tells us that we need to do it like this. Experts, and it needs to be formatted for quick deployment. Well, the thing that you're going to do if you choose to react, you're not going to play the emotional game. You are not going to start your marketing copywriter devise something which sounds good. That is not what you're going to do. And the second thing is, you're not going to try to attack the originators. So in fact, what you're doing is you take your truth bank, you have that, and you focus 100% on the people who are important to you: employees, stakeholders, and your key audiences. You are not going to try to attack. You're not going to respond to people who are caught up in the rage farming aspects, most of them unknowingly. You are going to focus on the people that you know, internal employees, or that you should know, stakeholders, and your key audiences with your truth bank. Now, there is, of course, and this is 24 hours, and I've put this in hours. It could be minutes, depending on who you are and how strong this attack is. But you see the urgency here. From 0 to 1, the first hour, it's verification. You really need to look at the source and scope of the attack. Where does it come from? What is the misinformation framing, and how is it spreading? Then you look at preparation. So, do we have the truth bank in place? Is there information that links to this that we can use this? You take the time to prepare your factual, direct response, no defensive language or emotional engagement. And that is crucial, because if you do that, if you would go into the defense, if you would use emotion, you are feeding the beast. And that's what algorithms are waiting for. So don't do that. Stay away and concentrate on the people that you know. And then if you decide to respond, then of course, activate your response. That means that you are going to communicate clearly, prominently across your channels, focusing on facts, definitely staying away from amplifying those false claims, and focusing on, again, your employees, your stakeholders, and your identified key audiences. And then, of course, you do an assessment, you monitor the impact, adjust when needed, and prepare for extended response. Because these things happen suddenly, but they can go on for a long time. It's not like they're following the normal crisis or emergency communication curve that we know, but they can happen very suddenly and then stay on for a very long time, depending on many different aspects. Who is behind it? What is the money behind it? Who's making the money? And this could be platforms or influencers. I mean, people make money on this. And so be prepared also for a long-term response need. Then find a strategic balance. This is very difficult. It depends on case by case. There is no, strict rule on this. But the point is, it always needs to be a balance. Swift action, yes, but a measured response. And that is sometimes difficult because you have the pressure of management and whatever. I know all that. But it is really balancing your response and always making sure that you're not going into that emotional response, which is feeding the system. Stakeholders, as I said, employees, investors, and partners, and your customers and your different audiences, your segmented audience, I hope. Don't try to communicate to the general public. That doesn't exist. And we're talking about online communication, but also face-to-face. Don't hesitate to have a town hall meeting with employees explaining what's happening. Don't hesitate to have face-to-face meetings with partners in a face-to-face setting behind a desk. And definitely also don't forget, if you're in the private sector, customers. But again, with that truth bank as the basis for your information. Don't forget, there is a digital security framework and impact there, or potential impact. So do get in touch with your IT people, because it could be a reputational attack, but it could also be the pre-phase of a physical IT attack. So do talk to your digital security people, that they should enhance monitoring, double or triple check access controls, prepare for an attack, or at least go in a level higher of alertness and creating multiple layers of security. But they should know how to do that. But do warn, if you're in comms, do warn, if you see this happening, do warn your IT security people, because we've seen that happening. And then there's physical security as well. Don't forget, I mean, we're talking maybe mainly here about private sector companies, organizations, but I do work in emergencies, so that could be health emergencies or natural hazards. We have physical security considerations there as well. There should be a threat assessment, a coordination with law enforcement in some cases, enhancing security measures and proceeding and reporting procedures. So imagine that there is a rage farming setup by an entity who wants to hinder humanitarian aid. It can go as far as physical attacks, right? So just mentioning that, I don't know if anyone comes from that background, but I do work in that environment, so I just wanted to mention that. And then support your team. Don't forget, it's very hard on communications professionals. So if you're not in comms but in a management function, don't forget. I mean, you should provide guidelines for people's social media presence during attacks. How can they ensure their privacy and settings? Because sometimes it goes as far as attacking employees. Mental health, it's an ongoing one. Make sure that your comms team has mental health support. And then, of course, leadership support. I think that is something that we all know, but still, I think it's important to put it on there. Long term, it's mainly about stakeholder relationships. You really need to, keep your relationships with media contacts, industry partners, communities, etc., really ongoing in the loop before anything happens. And we often say that, but unfortunately, I see that a lot of times it's just a list, an Excel list somewhere on a machine, and then it's not really a relationship. Ongoing education, so training definitely on rage farming tactics because they change. Like this webinar, for instance, is great. I'm creating an e-learning course because I think it's a very important topic, which is a bit under the radar. But do not forget to educate yourselves and your teams, and then do simulation exercises. I mean, there is nothing else that prepares you better than realistic simulation exercises. You need to do those regular response scenarios drills, and it doesn't have to be the fully fledged full-scale simulation exercise that takes a couple of days. It can be a 1 hour tabletop, quickly done, boom, but do it regularly. And then looking at your protocols. Are your protocols ready for if tomorrow there is a rage farming attack? Is that ready? Can you respond within the hour? Can you make decisions, or does it need to go through legal and then it takes 5 days, etc., etc.? Are your protocols adapted to very fast-moving issues and crises based on a rage farming organized attack? Learning, don't forget. Many people forget this. After you would have had a rage farming attack, document everything, analyze it, and then improve your SOPs. In the emergency or crisis cycle, we often forget that in a comms team. We shouldn't be forgetting that, because that's your continuous improvement. And that is how you become better and better and better after every issue or crisis that you manage. This is large, meaning that it can happen, as we said, to small organizations, bigger organizations, all sectors, across all sectors. So it is maybe also important to look at industry collaboration. How can you share knowledge with other companies, organizations in the same industry or the same sector? How can you create collective defense? Because these attacks are triggered on mostly industry company specific positions and ways of doing things. So maybe there's a red line there for a full industry, for instance. So definitely look at strategic partnerships within your industry if at all possible. And then implementation is the assessment. You stage the development of your response framework, you do that team training, and you do the testing. But I think, again, I mentioned that before, testing, training, simulations, that is the most important thing to prepare for a potential rage farming attack. I'll end with this. These are just a couple of common distortion patterns that we see. Rafi, you'll have seen others. I think we should document those. I made a list on my own, but maybe we can work on that together and then send that out, or at least make it public, because there are different things that you can look at in your own specific organization, depending on which industry you are or where you work. You could look at, okay, if this is impacting those organizations, maybe there's another type of rage farming topic which could then be very relevant for us. New environmental standards, employee well-being programs, a rebranding and logo change. That's really like, any kind of rebranding that you have in your plans, please create a rage farming protection scenario, because that could very well happen. So I'll leave it here. I'm sure there's a lot of questions or things to be discussed, but if you want to connect later on, you can scan the QR codes. You have my details, and hope to be in touch. But we still have a lot of time for Q&A. So happy to take the questions.
Amazing, Philippe. Thank you so much for that. For those who haven't come across Philippe but are joining us on this session, now you know that I wasn't lying when I said how much I've been looking forward to this, because it's the mix of the theory but also the really practical, which I find pretty unique out there in terms of your approach, and the fact that you're not just training it, which you are as well, but publishing guides, but also on the ground often, really on the ground in terms of putting this into place. It really echoes a lot of the things that we're seeing, and so many of the points that you made throughout the presentation was definitely reminding me of things that we're seeing, or is definitely resonates, particularly triggering emotions. The fact that and the framing around that I think is incredibly important. The framing around that is important context, but it's also important to remind us that we can't fix the culture of the framing, and so brands know that. So sometimes brands, in terms of thinking of the response, they kind of put their hands up and say, well, what can I possibly do about it?
Yeah,
I can't change the culture. And that's the point. That's by design, right? Those malicious actors are trying to tap into something that's larger in order to try and elicit that emotional trigger, but also as well to make it harder for brands to be able to respond. And I think that's incredibly important. The framing around that. You mentioned some of the short-term and long-term strategies, and especially when it comes to the communication across cyber and physical. That I think in particular it has to be a short-term. You have to have the monitoring around that, and you have to have the short-term, because if something is happening online and it's about to result in something physical, then the time gap between the two
yeah,
will not be very, very long. And also, you mentioned in terms of responding, you said two things. You said, is your response ready? And also, can you respond? Sometimes there's just two separate things. You may have even prepared, but actually, okay, someone is on a flight for the next few hours and they're the person that's been designated, but that means that you're not able to respond. You prepared your whole response plan, but actually you're not able to do that because you haven't worked out those eventualities. Okay, if this one person who's responsible is not available, have the next person down, and it means that there isn't that delay. And so I think that's incredibly interesting, and I certainly enjoyed it. And so I encourage everyone to put their questions. We had a couple of questions during as well, but now is definitely the time to ask your questions. And in fact, we had some questions beforehand as well. So we have some ready to go that the registrants left as they were registering for this event. And so maybe we'll start with Philippe, if it's okay. I'll ask you some of those questions that have been sent in so far, and then we'll pick up the ones that people are, I'm
yeah.
sure, furiously typing now. But to start with, just one of the easiest ones, what kind of industries or types of organizations are targeted most often with these kinds of attacks?
Yeah, I mean, as we said, right, it can happen to everyone, and of course, the cases known are the big brands because automatically the media talks about it, and then it's like that. But it can happen in any kind of industry. I mean, it's where, let's not forget, this is organized, and most of the time there is either a political origin to this, or it's purely to make money, because people make money, the platforms make money through this, let's not forget.
Mm-hmm.
The influencers can and are making money with this, and sometimes not even knowing that they're part of a rage farming strategy and attack. So really, there is no one industry that is safe from this.
Mm-hmm.
There is not one single brand. Of course, if you're a high flyer and you take position very loudly on societal issues, etc., then of course you're a bit more in that radar. Yeah, you're on the radar. But it doesn't necessarily have to be like that. You could be a very small organization that then maybe triggers the impact on other organizations because they're connected, for instance. That's another approach. So
Mm-hmm.
there's really no straight answer to that. It's
Mm.
really, everyone is really potentially a target for a rage farming attack.
Okay, wow. Okay, so no one's safe. We had a question just now, of how do you distinguish between rage farming and genuine outrage over a real incident? Is there a distinct difference, and are there different strategies that you can apply to distinguish and mitigate? And so I think while you take a minute to think about the answer, I just want to add an example that we saw recently during the LA fires, where there was a lot of conversation online, a lot of unhappiness and real outrage over how some of the organizations that were responsible for dealing with it and some of the insurance companies. And so I would say that much of that was genuine outrage, but something that we saw with one insurance company in particular that I won't name in our analysis after and during and after the LA fires was a particular narrative, and I now am going to quote Philippe because he mentioned something before about narrative distortion and actually misrepresenting the facts. So there could be this. I think this is a good example why I wanted to mention it, because there was genuine outrage over a real tragedy where people lost their homes. But one of the things that we detected with this specific insurance company was that there was a narrative being shared, pushed mostly by fake accounts, that the insurance company actually had prior knowledge that the fires were going to take place and that they were going to be the scale that they were. And that kind of more went into rage farming and kind of conspiracy theories, as there is lots of overlap here. And so this is an example where there was actual genuine outrage, but also there were a lot of these tactics that we've covered today that were being used, that if you are part of the communications team, crisis communications team of that insurance company, you need to address those conspiracy theories, because otherwise they'll run away and they will make it harder to deal with the wider challenge of actually dealing with the with the genuine outrage. So that's just one example I wanted to throw out there. Over to you, Philippe.
No, as I said in the beginning, you can actually see this happening. So what is real rage or discontent? You'll see it comes from different accounts. You'll have a different central topic, but a different narrative around that. It will not be sustained. It will be not less coordinated or not coordinated. So here it's really coordinated. You can see that it happens in a very short time. It moves up. You can actually see the same key messages being used, sometimes even the same wording, and the volume and the speed and the coordination technically. And Rafi, I mean, that's what you do actually, is you can actually see that. So you can actually distinguish. I'll give you an example, and this is long time ago. This is 2000, so almost 10 years. I was living in Morocco, and on a Friday, there was suddenly what was called a popular boycott of people boycotting, so not buying a certain brand of water, not buying a certain brand of milk, and not buying a certain or not pumping fuel at a certain fuel pump brand. I followed that. I documented it as well because it's an old story, but that was actually later on seen as a what we call today a rage farming attack, and that was with a political background, something different, but malicious actors. And why was I triggered at the time? I didn't hear. By the time I hadn't heard about the concept of rage farming. It was that it was so sudden. First of all, 3 boycotts of 3 brands on the same day. Very strange. On a Friday. Friday being the day that most people in Morocco go for prayer and don't work. So they've got time to look at social media, because that's also the peak when social media is being used. Popular demonstrations in the street, very rare in Morocco, but also, again, coordinated. So who's behind that? So when you ask also, well, why don't people who boycott, they have probably a good reason, and it was about rising prices, which again, factually, the prices didn't rise, but that's the thing. So it could be a very valid rage, but then come out, organize yourselves in a non-profit, and when government or others are questioning that, well, get into a conversation and try to reduce the pricing or whatever. I mean, there's a lot of things that can play. Never happened, never happened. So it's that coordination, very short moment of time, volume, and then in some cases going over into real street demonstrations as well, because that's as far as those things can go. And this is just by making people think that they have an authentic rage or thing, but they're actually part of a organized attack on a brand or on society or whatever.
Absolutely. I'm going to go back to one of the questions that was submitted beforehand, but I'm actually going to give you, Philippe, an opportunity to answer it, but also bring in a comment that was left just now. So, one of the questions that was asked before was, how can we as communicators work together to promote critical thinking among ordinary citizens on controversial topics? Now, I think your explanation of how the fact that emotions are being tapped into means that it's really, really challenging to answer and solve this challenge of critical thinking, because you can address one topic, but then it might move on to a different topic. And if all of those topics are emotional, it's very hard to be rational in that emotional moment. But there was one comment that was left by Niran. He left two comments there, but one of them says corporates need to understand, and Philip, maybe you can comment after this of whether you agree with this or not. Corporates need to understand the likely outcome. This is not usually something you win. The best you can do is neutralize the rage and state your position. Do you agree with that? And do you find that's potentially a useful comment to address the previous question?
So on the first one, it is a much bigger issue. It's a really and that's just what I think. But it's a society issue. We have there's many things, and it's too big for us communicators. That doesn't mean that we need to be vocal and very loud about this, and that we need to look at others to collaborate as much as we can. But it goes from our educational system, which is not promoting critical thinking anymore, to all the way to a polarized society. So it's really like the big problems, right? But that doesn't mean you can't do something. I think within the communications profession and through the associations, we've got enough of them. We've got really big associations on a global scale. We should be more vocal, and I think I can say that I'm an ex-president of IPRA, the International Public Relations Association, and so I know how these things work. But we could be more vocal about those issues, and actually offer potential small scale solutions, but we should be. But we should also be very realistic. This is a bigger issue. This is really, as I said, it starts with our education system, and I'm saying I think it's globally an issue, all the way to polarization, the way that politics are done today, the way that, I mean, it's very big.
Yeah,
But again, doesn't mean we just need to sit back and think, well, that's how the world turns. Never.
yeah, yeah,
Um, then on Niran's point, I think, yeah, winning is you never win. My first gut reaction is you never win a crisis. But here, yeah, it's really focusing on people that matter, meaning your employees, your stakeholders, your clients, and your identified key audiences. Because there's no use in going against the attacker, and there's no use in going at every single person who is caught up in that rage plan. That doesn't work. So the only thing you can do actually is winning this by the people that matter, explaining them what is happening, what your position is, why this position has been taken, going back to your truth bank and say, look, know that this is a coordinated attack. We stay with our position. This is why we stay with our position. These are the facts behind that, and we'll keep you up to date. But know that this is an organized attack, and that's I think the best you can do. And already, if you can do all that, what I just said in a couple of seconds, you have a top communications team, because it's never that easy.
Hmm. Yeah. I think we probably have run out of time, but I'm tempted just to squeeze in one last question if we can try and cover it quickly, which is a challenge. Is a question from Christine, who asked, could you discuss a bit more why you discourage identifying the source of the attack? If it would discredit the information, wouldn't that be helpful? So I'm not actually sure that that was something that you said in terms of discouraging it, but maybe you could address that question.
No, what I said is, as a communication team or professional, in your reaction, so your crisis communication, don't go against the originator. Don't try, because there is an agenda behind it. Doesn't mean from a security IT security point of view. Of course, people need to go and look at where this comes from. Needs to understand who is the bad actor, why is this happening, what are the resources coming from, because you need to know who's trying to attack you. Definitely, but that is generally not a communications responsibility. The thing that we do is see how can we counter this with communication. And in that case, I'm saying don't even try to go against those people, because it is organized. They have a good reason to do it. Well, a good reason for them. And there's money behind it. So it wouldn't shift the narrative at all. And then also going after people who are caught up in that rage farming, in that orchestrated rage. Well, again, many of those people don't even know they're part of this. So you can't reason with someone who is like enraged or very emotional about a topic. It's better to concentrate on the people that are close to you, that are important to you, and that you can reach in an efficient way. So definitely, no, we need to go and look at, and that is IT forensics, and you've got specialized organizations that do that. But definitely go and identify and try to understand why. And don't forget that can take a long time, right? So it's not something that normally happens very quickly. The case of Morocco, for instance, it took a year to identify the 5 influencers who coordinate this and the why behind that as well. So, see.
Amazing. I appreciate that. And apologies for running out of time to be able to address all of the questions. We are going to be sharing a recording afterwards. And thank all of you for joining us. I really enjoyed that session. There's so much more to cover, but actually I felt that we covered quite a lot and that we, covered quite a lot of ground in that one discussion. But I'm sure there's lots more. There we do have a pack session over the coming months of other live sessions that we are going to try and address so many of these, and all of them we aim to be as practical and as applicable as possible, especially for those working in brands or communications or in crisis communications, any of those kinds of roles where they are being asked those questions or might be experiencing some of this even on a small scale themselves, because it's so important as an industry that we that we discuss the practical answers, because that's what's expected of all of us. And we can't give the answer of saying, oh, in a generation, there's going to be more media literacy. We don't have that luxury. So that's why these sessions are so important. And that's why it's great to have you with us, Philippe. Thank you so much for your
Thank you
time.
again for having me.
Really, really, really is a pleasure. I believe that at the we're going to send out a very short survey. We would love your feedback. And of course, that all survey is also an opportunity for you to suggest if there are topics or speakers that you yourself would like to see. There are lots of really interesting people out there, lots of really interesting topics, and we really want to try and cover them all. But that just leaves me to say thank you so much for joining, Philippe. Thanks again. Really, really good to
Thank
see
you
you
for the
again.
invitation.
And everyone from wherever you are, have a wonderful day. Thank you so much.